12, 13 minutes or so. So anyway, as you all may know, this is the 50th anniversary of the birth of the personal computer industry, specifically the Altair, the MITS Altair 8800. It was announced in I'm going to show it on here, the January 1975 issue of Popular Electronics. So we're a little bit late for my presentation in October, but hey, so we're still celebrating it. And also a little bit about Ed Roberts, its creator. So what I'd like to start off with is early on when I got into computer history and collecting and stuff, I was really inspired by a documentary. And in fact, I found when I was preparing my presentation, there's an enhanced version now on YouTube. And so it's in higher quality. It's from 1992 called Machine That Changed the World. And I have a little segment that I really love from it here that we'll start off with.
A few miles from Xerox PARC in Silicon Valley, the electronics capital of the world, a revolution was underway. Every year, engineers vied with each other to stuff more and more electronic circuitry onto tiny wafers of silicon. Computers which once filled a room had been reduced to the size of a refrigerator. And in 1971, the silicon wizards went a step further, putting the main circuitry of a computer on a chip. A chip which could be mass-produced. The microprocessor had the power to totally change the economics of computing. Computers need no longer be priceless objects. Microprocessors, if mass-produced, could become cheap enough to be disposable.
I had one case where I was being interviewed by somebody from a magazine who kept asking questions about testing. But I realized after this questioning went on for a while that they weren't really talking about testing, they were talking about repair. And they had the idea that somehow somebody was going to have to take their soldering iron and go down inside the chip and try to move wires around. And then once I realized what they were really asking, I said, oh no, it's not like that at all. It's like a light bulb. When it burns out, you unplug it and you throw it in the garbage and plug in a new one. And they were just dumbfounded at the idea that a computer could be so inexpensive you'd think about throwing it away.
But in the mid-70s, corporate giants like IBM were not convinced that ordinary people would ever want to buy computers, even if they were small and cheap. Seemingly unaware of the brilliant work of Xerox PARC, they saw their customers as scientific and business institutions. There was a group of technical people on the fringes of the computer establishment, however, who desperately wanted their own computers. Technical hobbyists who had used computers at universities and knew their remarkable versatility. Before the microprocessor, their dreams seemed absurd. Now, perhaps, things would change. In January 1975, the front cover of Popular Electronics featured a computer kit called the Altair for less than $500. The Altair had to be assembled by hand, but at its heart was a microprocessor. If people did want to own a computer, here finally was an opportunity. An opportunity, it turned out, that thousands of people had been waiting for.
And what happened was all this pent-up demand, a sort of latent understanding everybody had of what computers could do, suddenly was allowed to burst forth. People drove all night to get their computer kits. Why do people read the popular mechanics magazines? Because they dream of all the things they could do if. And suddenly here was a new if. If only I had this computer, I could keep track of everything, I could learn everything, I could be creative in every possible way. And so it began.
For technical hobbyists, it was a dream come true. Now they could have their own computer. Clubs of enthusiasts grew up all over America, like the Homebrew Computer Club in San Francisco, where members showed off what their homebrewed computers could do. From these modest beginnings came a series of startup companies selling parts for the Altair, and soon, whole computers. By 1976, there were enough of them to hold a convention in Atlantic City. Off in a corner of the convention hall were a group of raggedy-looking guys selling circuit boards. Two of them would become synonymous with a personal computer: Steve Jobs and Stephen Wozniak.
So, great documentary, can't recommend it enough. This is from the very first episode. And one thing interesting, I don't know if you picked up on it, the narrator made the distinction of that computers would no longer be priceless objects, because they essentially were before personal computers. But early in the documentary, they make the sort of equivalence of the book, and how books at one point were priceless objects. The very first libraries were, the monks, remember, they would hand draw, and only elite people could even get into them. And then the books were chained to the bookshelves. So the chains were just long enough for you to take the book down and open it up on the table and read it. You couldn't even take it out of the library because they were priceless, handmade. And then the printing press and ultimately the paperback book made books commodity items. And that's where we are, right? With computers are commodity items now. So really great documentary, my all-time favorite. Really inspired me about documentaries in general. So a lot of stuff here, I'll fly through it, but I'm gonna talk just a minute about definition of personal computer, and essentially before the Altair. So before the Altair, the term personal computer was virtually non-existent in the public or professional vocabulary. Computers during this period were large, often room size, they were expensive, they cost tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and only institutions, usually governments and corporations and universities, owned them. Typical characteristics of pre-Altair computers were mainframes and mini computers like the IBM or the DEC systems, required teams of professionals to operate and maintain. Input was via punch cards, teletype terminals, or batch processing. And usually they were so expensive that they're only accessed by multiple users through time sharing. So in short, a personal computer, in the sense of something owned and used by one person at home or work, simply didn't exist. The concept was impractical due to size, cost, and technical complexity. So then the next question is, what was the very first personal computer? And this is a little controversial. The Computer History Museum says that it's the Kinbach 1 from 1971. So it really depends on what you call a personal computer. In its simplest definition, it's a computer meant to be used by an individual, personal use, right? I think nowadays that we came to understand it means it's a consumer product. It's available to the general public. It can be purchased, and and then it's also meant for one person, but obviously multiple people could use them. But anyway, some contenders were the Kinbach 1, 1971. David, you brought a reproduction of one over there, right? And it didn't, one thing it didn't have, which I think is an important distinction, is it didn't have a microprocessor. It used discrete circuitry. You couldn't do a whole lot with it either, but you could learn some things about computers. But moving on, the Xerox Alto, a lot of people like to think of this as a personal computer, was designed for an individual, but this computer is not sold commercially. Also, it was giant, it cost lots of money. And then it needed, like what you see here is the computer, right? There's the big computer, the display, the mouse, the keyboard. But what you don't see is the infrastructure behind this. You couldn't just generally plug it in and use it. You had to have a network of other Xerox Altos and stuff. So anyway, it doesn't really count in my opinion. So, and then in 1974, you had two other kit computers that competed with this distinction, ultimately the Altair. So the Selby H8H, 1974, and the Mark 8, 1974. Both of these, though, were available. You could buy them. They were kits, not mass-produced, not very successful. Not very many were built. But also they did use a microprocessor. Oh, this didn't use a microprocessor either. But they used the 8008, the predecessor to the 8080, which the Altair used. And I'll cover that a little bit more. So was the MITS Altair 8800 of 1975 the first personal computer? Put simply, in my opinion, yes, in all the ways that really matter. To be more specific, it was the world's first mass-produced, commercially successful personal computer. And then this is the 1975, January 75 issue of Popular Electronics. And then on the right here is a picture I took back in the day when I visited a gentleman in Albuquerque who had actually worked for MITS. And these are his computers. He had an original Altair, then a later B model under it. And he had some MITS calculators and stuff. So one thing notable about this cover here is the prototype Altair that was built for this magazine cover never actually made it to the publication's offices. This is like a mock-up. It was lost when the freight carrier REA, which was a precursor of UPS, went bankrupt while transporting the machine. And so it was never found. But one thing that did is it had Ed Roberts and the other people, Forrest Mims and them involved in it, at MITS, they kind of rethought some things. This did not have what later became known as the S100 bus, the Altair bus. So that was kind of a good thing that came out of that. So a lot of stuff here, again, I'll fly through it. So some reasons justifying why I say it's the very first personal computer, and I disagree with the prestigious Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, full of PhDs and all these. So it was designed for individual ownership and use. Ed Roberts' vision was explicitly to make a computer for personal ownership, not just for business or institutional settings. It could sit on a desk, be operated by one person. It was the embodiment of the concept of the personal computer. It was based on the Intel 8080. The Altair was built around the Intel 8080 microprocessor, which was the first to contain all the essential components of a general purpose CPU on a single chip. I'm not that technical when it comes to there, but David could throw some things out there. I think the 8008 had less registers, had less to be a really useful general purpose full-on personal computer, right? In a nutshell?
Right. Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but
Okay.
it was much.
The Altair marked the shift from mainframe mini computer designs using discrete logic to microprocessor-based systems. Every computer we use to this day uses a microprocessor now, from our phones, tablets, computers. It was commercially successful and was publicly recognized that way. MITS sold thousands of units, far exceeding expectations. Its visibility in major publications made the idea of owning a personal computer part of mainstream awareness. And it sparked the birth of the personal computer industry. Its release in the January 75 issue of Popular Electronics inspired thousands to build their own computers. And it directly led to the formation of Microsoft. So I don't know if everybody knows this, but Bill Gates and Paul Allen actually worked for Ed Roberts at MITS to create Altair Basic, the first product of Microsoft. I think they worked for him about a year until they went from Albuquerque back up to Redmond, Seattle area. And it inspired other early PC makers such as MSI, Processor Technology, Apple, Commodore, and many others. Here's an early ad for MITS as far as the kit, $439. Here's this a picture, we have a real one right here, but here's a picture of an Altair. And then here's an ad for that later Altair 8800B. Nice looking ad. A few more things. It was the first truly affordable, fully functional, and available computer for individuals. Introduced in January 75 for $397, Altair 8800 made owning a computer financially possible. Prior to it, computers were either mini computers costing thousands or limited calculator and hobby boards. Oh yeah, some machines I didn't mention is there's a French computer, the Marcol, I think, or excuse me, I'm saying it wrong. There's an Italian computer. There's other competitors that people like to call the first personal computer, but again, they didn't meet all these other distinctions of general purpose and everything. It was user programmable and general purpose, unlike calculators or dedicated systems. The Altair could be programmed for any tasks, from math to games. It was not a single purpose machine. It was a true general purpose computer for personal use. And lastly, the community and ecosystem that came up around it. The Altair gave rise to the Homebrew Computer Club and a nationwide community of hobbyists who traded software, hardware, ideas, and innovations. Also, Altair stores, publications. Ed Roberts and MITS really innovated quite a lot, and he doesn't get credit for it.
Right, because before that, with all these other computers like the Kenbach and the one from Intel and the others.
Just like one product and.
No community grew up around them.
Yeah.
With the Altair, you ended up having clones and people selling cars, and the standardized bus allowed anyone to build accessories for them.
So just a little bit about Ed Roberts. He's now widely known and accepted as the, quote, father of the personal computer. Many people are unaware that he was also Dr. Henry Edward Roberts, a small town doctor in Cochran, Georgia, about 40 miles south of Macon. Very inspiring story. He sold the business in 1977, a lot of politics going on and stuff, and very successful, but he's like, maybe now I can go pursue, he was always interested in biology and becoming a medical doctor. It's a longer story, but I think I covered a little bit here. He was an entrepreneur and a business owner, and he had 3 distinct careers during his life. He was a U.S. Air Force Airman officer, then an electronics engineer, inventor, and then ultimately he became a doctor. And he spent the rest of his life in a small rural town of Georgia. I always forget this. What's it called? The doctor who specializes in the older people?
Geriatrics.
Okay, thank you. He truly lived out the American dream, and his life was an inspiring one. Although he got sidetracked early on from his dream of becoming a doctor, he worked hard and enjoyed his other endeavors. He never gave up, though, and finally made that dream come true, becoming a medical doctor at 45 years old in 1986. He loved technology and gadgets, but he loved medicine and helping people even more. He was a smart, sophisticated man who, in the end, chose a simple country lifestyle. In 1995, I was in Jacksonville. I lived in Jacksonville. And I drove up to Cochran, Georgia, and I met Dr. Roberts, and I interviewed him. And it's a fairly historic interview. I've got part of it now on YouTube because I'm making a video with the audio. But here's a picture I took of Ed at his desk, and this is the device I used to record him. This was his office, and I even had him sign. I had the documentation for 8800B, so I had him sign that for me. Oh, I think that's it. All right, I got one last thing.